Broadcasting the information the mainstream media won't touch. This is The Richie Allen Show in association with DavidIke.com.
Our first guest today makes thought-provoking and challenging films. He really does. He is the director and writer of such documentaries as There's No Place Like Utopia, Dreams from My Real Father, Atomic Jihad, Ahmadinejad's Coming War, and Obama's Politics of Defeat. Really looking forward to chatting with him. I have been since he agreed to come on the show. You can check him out at his website, which is joelgilbert.net. It's lovely to welcome to the show Joel Gilbert. Joel, thanks for coming on. How are you?
Hi, Richie. Great to be here, all the way from Los Angeles.
All the way from Los Angeles. It's the City of Angels. Great to have you on. And you know, I was thinking today, by the way, Joel is also in a Bob Dylan tribute band, which is kind of cool, it must be said. If you want to pay tribute to anybody, Bob Dylan is. It doesn't get any better than that. Do you know what I was thinking? Do you know what I was thinking about you today? I was thinking, as a filmmaker, a documentary filmmaker, and somebody who's certainly you're consumed by, you know, an appetite for news and current affairs and politics. Your mind must be blown at the course that the current presidential election is taking, and the interest in it, maybe more interest in an election than there has been maybe for a decade or 2 decades. What do you think, Joel?
Absolutely. It's been fascinating. It's really been a long time coming because we saw the electorate has been enraged over the last 8 years and even before. In the last 8 years, we saw Barack Obama, of course, ran for president in 2008 as a moderate, as a mainstream candidate. He said he was going to cut the deficit in half. He's going to support Israel. Obamacare is not a tax. I'm going to have the most transparent administration in history. And a lot of people voted for him because they didn't know his real background. They didn't know who he was. And they just believed this lie that he put forward, that he was kind of a mainstream guy. As soon as Obama took office, it became clear that he was a far-left radical, and he abandoned the electorate, threw them under the bus, and pursued a radical left agenda that no one voted for. Again and again over the last 8 years, we've seen him do outrageous, absurd things to the American people, things like when he didn't get his way on the budget, he closed down all the American national parks so people couldn't go hiking. They covered up Mount Rushmore so people couldn't see it. He had the IRS investigate his political opponents, scandal after scandal, secrecy. And the American public is fed up with being tricked by the Democrat Party, by the politicians. Even during the Bush years, George Bush had a lot of problems too. He led us into a war in Iraq that probably wasn't necessary, blew up the budget. So you have a electorate that's really fed up with the mainstream politicians, and we're seeing that expressed in a lot of support for people that say they're going to do things a different way.
Got to ask you this. Well, there's 2 things I want to mention. First of all, with Bush, you said probably wasn't necessary. I would like to think Americans, if they believed the official version of what happened on September the 11th, would have a problem with the US going into Iraq based on the fact that 17 of the 19 hijackers were Saudi Arabian and that Iraq had nothing to do with it. And I know you've tackled that in your films, Joel. Joel, talk to me about Obama. Why are people so surprised that they've gotten fascism and corporatocracy from Obama? Why are they surprised? And talk to me about how this guy came out of nowhere. I've covered news and politics for nearly 2 decades, and I cover US politics for a long, long time, and I never heard of the junior senator from Illinois. To me, it was all wrong from the very beginning. This guy came out of nowhere, Joel.
Right. Well, look, Obama's election was not a sudden political phenomenon. It really was the result of 30 years of an American socialist movement, the culmination of a movement that had infiltrated the U.S. economy, universities, and the media, entertainment business. And these far-left radicals had been taught by the 60s radicals. If you recall, Obama's mentor, who helped write his book, Dreams from My Father, in Chicago was Bill Ayers, who was a Marxist terrorist from the Weather Underground. They murdered policemen. They pursued an ideology to overthrow the U.S. government. They were not anti-war protesters. They wanted to overthrow the government, replace the Constitution with the Communist Manifesto. It was all in their ideology. They thought if they would bomb some government buildings and murder policemen, it would start this worldwide or countrywide communist revolution to overthrow the government. Now, this plan was evil, and that's why people didn't follow them. These guys ended up going to jail. They went in the underground for 10 years. When the radicals from the 60s emerged from the Weather Underground in the early 80s, they all moved to Chicago, where they came from originally. They joined up with universities and educational institutions, and they founded things like the Midwest Academy to train a new generation of radicals. And Barack Obama was in the Midwest Academy. He was a trainer for Acorn and was one of these far-left radicals being trained by the 60s radicals. And the lesson they taught them, Bill Ayers and these guys from the 60s, they said, look, when we looked people in the eye and we said we want to destroy America, we want to overthrow the government, nobody followed us, and we ended up going to jail. So we want to teach you the lesson we learned, which is look people in the eye and tell them you want to help them. Tell them you want to help poor people. Do not reveal your true agenda. And slowly we'll take over the Democrat Party. So that is the agenda they pursued from the early 80s.
Can I jump in? Can I jump in and ask you a question? This is brilliant. Look, I can't stand him, right? But I'm going to take issue with how far left you think he is, and I really can't stand him. I mean, nobody has been harder on whistleblowers than this guy. You say that he's not supported Israel. I'll tell you this, Joel. I believe in a state of Israel and a state of Palestine side by side. I do believe in that, even though most of our listeners wouldn't agree with me. But I do call Israel an apartheid state and a terrorist state. That's what I feel personally. But we don't need to argue about that. This guy Obama, is there any evidence at all that this guy had anything to do with the CIA?
Well, in my film Dreams from My Real Father,
which I've seen and it's brilliant. And the reason I'm asking this is because some of our listeners won't have seen it. Go on.
Right, Dreams from My Real Father. You can see the website obamasrealfather.com. You got the trailer there. I think I chronicled and provided a mountain of evidence that it was Obama's grandfather, Stanley Dunham, who had served in military intelligence during World War II and then became a CIA officer. And his entire family on his father's side did work for the CIA, I believe, including on his grandfather's side, including his grandmother. And that's why they were moving around the USA, moving to Seattle, and that's why they moved to Hawaii. So I think I've established that Obama's story that his grandfather was simply a furniture salesman is not true. And that, in fact, it was through his work with the CIA that Obama's grandfather came in touch with Frank Marshall Davis. Frank Marshall Davis, as I show in the film, I think I've demonstrated is Obama's real biological father. Davis became his ideological mentor during his formative years. Now, the reason this is important is because Frank Marshall Davis was a Communist Party propagandist and a Soviet agent, and this is the man that raised Obama, and I think I showed that makes Obama a red diaper baby, the child of an American communist. So there is an intelligence background, certainly, on Obama's grandfather's side.
You must, like me, you must absolutely despise what has become the corporate media, because using your own skills as a documentarian and a journalist, you were able to uncover this and uncover other things, and yet the people supposed to be doing that job in the run-up to the last election weren't doing it. I do remember, though, to be fair, to give credit to David Icke, when that election campaign was ongoing, before even before Palin was announced as John McCain's running mate, David Icke was given a talk in Los Angeles. And the talk went swimmingly until the very end, when David started criticising Obama and asking questions about who he was. And, a lot of African Americans didn't like it. They saw this guy as somebody who was going to become a big hero and he was going to right a lot of wrongs. Can I just bring you back to something that's very interesting, by the way? And you talked about Bill Ayers and Obama. They wouldn't have been the first group of people, though, to want to overthrow the US government. I'm thinking of Smedley Butler and the plot to overthrow Franklin D. Roosevelt, which may or may not have included people like Prescott Bush and people associated with him and others, wealthy industrialists back in the early 1930s. So it's not uncommon over the relatively short life of the United States for subversive groups to want to overthrow the government. Well,
the far left groups supported by the Soviet Union Obama's father would join the Communist Party in 1932 in Chicago. He wrote for all the communist newspapers, and they were part of Comintern, directed the Chicago Communists, and that's how his father came to Hawaii. He was directed to go to Hawaii to help train the labor unions out in Hawaii before statehood to try to take over the Hawaiian government through a strike, because the Russians thought that the presence of the U.S. naval base in Hawaii was preventing Soviet expansion in Asia. That's how his father got to Hawaii in the first place. So the far left, supported by the Soviet Union, has always felt the United States was an obstacle to world domination. This is why they realized that they could not defeat the United States militarily, but they could defeat the United States internally through subverting its government, its culture, all the things that they've tried over the years. They've been successful sometimes, and sometimes they're not successful, but they keep trying. In the 60s, they made a big effort to use the Vietnam War as an excuse to take over the government, and it failed. In the 70s, they were quiet, and they've been coming back ever since. And now we've seen that the Democrat Party itself has been taken over by far-left radicals. And today, the Democrat Party is a radical socialist party. Most Americans don't realize this. They go to a Bernie Sanders rally, and he says things like, we're going to take down Wall Street and the pharmaceutical companies, and we're going to go after
but he's not. But he's not.
We're going to go after business, and people just clap, even though they have no idea what he's talking about. His intention is to destroy business, and we see what that happened in the city of Detroit, which has been destroyed. When Barack Obama ran for president in 2008, he told the crowd several times, he said, we're going to have a civilian national security force in America just as powerful as our military. Now, that's the most bizarre statement that you might hear from Lenin or Francisco Franco, but everybody just clapped. They had no idea what he was talking about. So there is a naivete and a lack of knowledge of Americans that just kind of follow along without understanding how evil some of these ideas are.
Joel, you sound a bit like, and this isn't a criticism at all, by the way, not that I would be reticent to criticise you. I'd be happy to criticise you if I could find something to criticise you for, but you sound a bit like a free market capitalist. Would that be a fair assumption?
I certainly believe that the free market system provides for the best opportunity for societies to grow and gain wealth and provide opportunity for everybody. And we've seen again and again in history, you don't have to look very far back, that all government-controlled economies result in massive poverty, police states to force people to go to work, even though they don't want to work because there's nothing to buy, even if they make money. And we've seen that again and again in the Soviet Union, the Eastern Bloc, and in America, in cities like Detroit, where the government control became so prevalent that businesses left and people ended up leaving. There's just no question. I'm a student of history. I went to the London School of Economics, by the way, in the UK, and we learned the lessons of history that the free market economy is certainly the way to go.
Now, I'll tell you this.
The Western world.
I'll tell you this. I've had Jeff Berwick on the programme a few times, and Jeff and myself have had a good old, what we call here in England, a good old ding-dong. We've had a good battle, a fair and a very respectful one about that. I don't agree with that, but I'm not going to get into it now. But you're certainly welcome to come back in the future, and you and I can have a good chat about the merits or lack of a free market capitalism. I've got problems with that. But anyway, it's brilliant having you on. Folks, if you're just joining the programme, 24 minutes to the top of the hour, you are with the Richie Allen Show, live in association with DavidIke.com, ACR and Fab Radio 2 here in Manchester. Loving the conversation with Joel Gilbert. Check out his website, joelgilbert.net. His documentaries are thought-provoking. They are challenging, as I said earlier on, and there's not a lot of dogma. I like that. There's a lovely tone to what Joel says, whether you agree with it or not. Questions coming in on Twitter, Joel, lots and lots of them. If Donald Trump has absolute proof that unprecedented scale of fraud took place with regards to the election of Barack Obama, why hasn't Donald Trump provided it?
In terms of election fraud?
No, but in terms of Obama's legitimacy to stand for president in the first place.
Well, look, in 2008, Obama's entire candidacy was based on his life story and his book called Dreams from My Father. He said, my father's from Kenya, I grew up in Indonesia, and so there was a natural question that all politicians get even if they don't say they grew up abroad or they had a father from a foreign country, the question came up and they asked Obama, would he please release his birth certificate, and Obama refused to do so. So it was Obama's refusing to provide information that caused a lot of people to question whether he really was eligible, because you're supposed to be born in the United States to two citizen parents, or you can be born abroad to two citizen parents if you're, there's different rules about that. So this was a natural question that came up, and Donald Trump picked up on that at some point. He was not one of the original researchers like Dr. Jerome Corsi and others who really questioned why would Obama not release his information. He also wouldn't release his college records, his high school records, his records as a senator, state senator from Illinois. So it was Obama's secrecy that led people like Trump to question, who is this guy, what's his background? And I took that a step further, I think, by revealing that his real biological father was an American communist who radicalized him in his youth into this radical Marxist ideology, and that he's not the commander-in-chief, he's the radical-in-chief. He's a professional agitator and had no intention of doing anything that he said he was going to do.
It's 22 minutes to the top of the hour. Why do people believe? I believe, Joel, and I provide some circumstantial evidence, I suppose, or documentary evidence over the years. I believe that ultimately, once the politician, once the man or woman ascends to the stage where they are, on the national stage, where they are running for president, well, they're all ultimately playing for the same team. Now, I know you have regularly visited InfoWars. Alex is an old friend of mine. I've been chatting with Alex for years. I've been on his programme. You know that Alex would have similar opinions to me in that sense. Why would people believe, despite all the evidence to the contrary, that Donald Trump, for example, is different, that he is his own man, that he's not beholden to the city, Wall Street, he's not beholden to the big corporations? Why do people buy that?
I think because he is a deeply flawed candidate with a past history of womanizing, questionable financial deals, all kinds of issues where he's on all sides of everything in his history. But he was a celebrity on a number one rated TV show for 14, 15 years. He's the kind of person that talks off the cuff and is very sincere. Even though he says the opposite things in one day long, when he says something, he means it. Even if he changed his mind from 5 hours ago, he's telling the truth 5 hours later when he says something else. So there's a certain authenticity about him and a familiarity from being a celebrity on a TV show that people have watched for years. So people have a certain level of comfort with him, as opposed to people that use political speak. So it's an interesting phenomena. I don't think Trump will be the Republican nominee, and I think...
is he a stalking horse for Clinton, Joel?
Is he a stalking horse for Clinton? There's certainly ample evidence to show that he supported and backed Hillary Clinton. He gave her money to run for president. I have him on tape. He said he thinks Barack Obama will be a great president. So would Donald Trump be comfortable with Hillary as president? He certainly made it clear in the past that he would. He's professed to a conservative conversion of sorts, and that's the problem that most conservatives have with him, most that are supporting Ted Cruz. They say, well, it sounds great that Donald Trump is saying the types of things we like to hear, but what's his real DNA? Is he going to get into office and maybe it'll be an ego-driven presidency where he's just trying to show how great he is and how smart he is, and he'll just abandon all these principles? So this is why I think his candidacy will ultimately fail and he will not be the Republican nominee.
Do you think it's likely? I mean, when way back last year, at the beginning of last year, when I say we, there's me and my producers and the team who do social media for me, and chatting amongst ourselves, we came to the opinion that it's been predetermined, maybe as far back as a long time ago, that it's going to be Hillary Clinton.
Is it predetermined? I don't think it's predetermined. I think Hillary is a terribly flawed candidate. I don't think we have. I think there is election fraud in the United States, mostly on the part of the Democrats through registering dead people, the early vote system where people vote 2 weeks in advance, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, absentee ballots. These are areas of massive fraud that the Democrats have developed over the years.
Yeah, but don't forget Florida 2000 now, my friend.
Florida 2000. Don't forget that it's a very unsettling coincidence that George Soros and Brenner, the CIA director, all these guys, Hagel, the former defense minister, all these guys tend to own companies that manufacture voting machines.
That's right.
This is quite strange. Of all the people, why would they be in this business? So there's certainly definite concern over voter fraud. I think the biggest voter fraud, of course, is the media gives billions of dollars of free-earned media to the Democrats, attacks the Republican. So they're certainly stacked against what you would think would be a fair election. But I still think that Hillary is such a flawed candidate and such a horrible orator with such a horrible history of flawed policies. I think she would lose in a landslide to Donald Trump or anybody else.
But the point I was making earlier on, and I know you disagree with this, it doesn't matter because what you have is a group of hand-selected candidates. Every one of them, despite what they might say, every one of them has been gotten to by AIPAC. Now, Joel, we could argue all night about that. I'm a nice guy, by the way. I do like to listen to people, so I certainly wouldn't be shouting you down. But what sort of country accepts a situation where its potential leaders can't say enough times on television or on radio that they swear allegiance to a foreign power? This is staggering.
Yeah,
we see Trump.
I just can't follow you, agree with you on that.
Why?
When you mentioned something about being gotten to by AIPAC, that sounds like one of these, anti-Semitic conspiracy theories.
You're not calling me an anti-Semite now, Joel, surely. Listen.
The conspiracy theory that somehow AIPAC controls candidates is very far-fetched.
Well, can I just say this, and then I'll obviously you'll get a chance to come back. Speaking with a number of former congresswomen and men and some current congresswomen and men over the years, they can't get their feet under their desk when they take office for the first time without being swarmed by AIPAC representatives offering money and other incentives to sign the pact. This is serious, Joel. This is very serious stuff.
There's any number of lobbying groups that lobby on behalf of any number of U.S. allies, any number of companies, any number of global interests.
Not like Israel, though.
They're always trying to get their point of view across, and the people at AIPAC and millions of evangelicals across the country, as well as most Americans, believe that Israel is the bulwark and the first line of defense of the West of the United States against Islamic expansionism. Israel served as a
It's an apartheid state, Joel.
Well, Israel protected and was the bulwark against Soviet expansion back in the 60s, 70s, 80s. Israel was part of the victory over communism because it was the eastern flank for Western Europe. Today, Israel is the number one target of Islamists, and it's the number one
you say
bulwark
that
against the Islamist expansion that protects Europe in the United States.
You say that, but not a single move towards Israel has been made by the so-called Islamic State or by Daesh. I find that kind of strange.
Well, the only reason Jordan has not been invaded by ISIS or Saudi Arabia or Egypt, for that matter, Israel is the first line of defense, not only for the West but for Arab countries. And only with a strong Israel is the United States security protected, and that's why the United States supports and has given money and been in cooperation with Israel's military over the years, because the United States, including the lobbyists, the man on the street, realized that Israel shares Western values. It's not going to be taken over suddenly by some anti-Western, anti-American government like any other ally in the Middle East can be taken over. So there's a strong consensus throughout the Congress, whether or not there's a lobbying group, and the American people, that Israel represents U.S. interests.
Let me come back now. Let me come back on that. Because you did bring up the anti-Semite card. Let me tell you who I am. I'm loving this, by the way. I'm delighted. Joel Gilbert is on the show, 13 and a half minutes to the top of the hour. Check out joelgilbert.net. That's Joel's website. He is a documentarian and a journalist who's made some terrific films, some challenging films, and he's on the line to us now from the City of Angels. Joel, I'm an Irish guy. I'm not a Holocaust denier. I have no problem with the state of Israel, despite how it came to be and the problems with that. I'm a realist. I'm aware that every country on the earth came to be through bloodshed, violence and death and destruction. I'm not an idiot. But I see this, and I'm not speaking for anybody else, only myself. I see Israel as an apartheid state. I see it as a terrorist state. I see the plight of Gazans, of Palestinians. I see that through the eyes of Israelis who come on this programme, people whom are based there, and other NGOs and other charities around the world. I cannot believe that we allow Israel away with it. I can't believe that Israelis, considering what happened to Jewish men and women throughout history, by the way, stand by the treatment of a people like that. I also can't believe that, and I'm going to shut up now, I know I'm on a soapbox, but I do mean this. I also can't believe that the Western world stands by while Israel ignores UN resolution after UN resolution after UN resolution. I believe in sanctioning Israel, and I would do that if I would try to do that if I was the Prime Minister of Ireland or of England, to show Israel that it should be no different to any country in the world, irrespective of the terrible things that happen to its people. That's where I am. I'm not an anti-Semite, I'm not a closet racist, and the United States should not enable Israel to do what it does. Now I'll shut up, you have the floor, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Well, I made a movie called Farewell Israel, Bush Iran and the Revolt of Islam. It's at farewellisrael.com. And this is the entire history of the Islamic-Jewish conflict starting in the 7th century from the birth of the Prophet Muhammad all the way through present times. I would certainly recommend you watch that film. I'll be happy to send along a DVD. And this chronicles the entire history of the Islamic worldview and how it views itself as a superior religious and political force, and how in the Islamic world they have a different set of structure of government and society. In the West, we have equality of religions, equality of people. In the Islamic world, Islam is the superior religious and political force, and Christianity and Judaism are allowed to live under Islam in a tributary status as dhimmi or as second-class citizens. So this is the nature of the opposition to the state of Israel. In the Islamic world, Jews cannot have their own state where they dominate over Muslims. And this has been the struggle of even the Western governments, people in the West like yourself, even the Israelis themselves, many of them which you said you have on your show, they think that the Islamic world will accept them and want to live in peace and equality. In fact, in this film, I show that in the Islamic worldview, they have to be the dominant force in their region and can never accept a Jewish state, or a Christian state of Lebanon for that matter.
But I don't go along with that.
I'll be happy to send along the DVD.
Do, and it's an excellently produced film. I've seen the film, and I'm not patronising you by saying that. I just don't agree with it. We've never had a chance to see it. We're assuming that Islamic people in that region wouldn't be buoyed or be uplifted by seeing that Israel is held to account for its wrongdoings like any other country in the world. And that's all I've ever asked for. I don't believe, I get people on here saying we should have a one-state solution, Palestine and all. I say no, pre-67 borders, restitution, two countries side by side, even if we have to police it ourselves in the early years of it. That's what I believe in.
Well, look, that's the fantasy of people in the West, of Israelis that believe that peace and love can be achieved with a two-state solution. Don't forget, between 1948 and 1967, the Muslim countries controlled all that territory, and there was no peace and love. They used that territory to try to destroy Israel. The idea of a two-state solution was proposed by the Islamic countries after they lost these territories. And at the time when they proposed it in the late 60s, it was a joke. It was considered laughable. No one took it seriously. Only in the 70s, the Israeli left and some Western countries picked up on this propaganda that if only Israelis will withdraw back to the borders where we tried to wipe them out, there'll be peace and love will break out. And this became Western policy and even Israeli leftist policy.
But you're ignoring something, Joel. And by the way, I really appreciate you letting me jump in. by the way. Not a lot of people do. You're passionate about this, but you are ignoring something, and I'm going to say this and shut up. You're ignoring that between 47 and 49, the Haganah, the Irgun and the Stern Gang, terrorist groups associated with Israel, basically got 800,000 non-Jews out of their homes and out of their country. There's bound to be a reaction to that, right?
Well, again, you have to go back and watch my film. The history, of course, of the region is that Palestine was really just a crossroads, very underdeveloped. It was only with the immigration and return of Jews to that region that it became developed economically, and you had then immigration of Arabs and different groups coming in there. There really is no historic thing as a Palestinian people or a group of people that call themselves Palestinians.
But that doesn't matter, even if it's true. They were there. It was their homes. It was their land. It's where they lived forever.
Well, that's just not true. The people, for example, a lot of the Arabs in Israel and the West Bank are Egyptian in origin. Some of them are Lebanese. It really was a crossroads. It was not a homogeneous country like we have in Europe. We're Irish and we're French and we're Italians and these guys are Palestinians. There was no such thing. It was part of the Ottoman Empire, which was a large empire of ethnic groups, including hundreds of thousands of Jews living in Israel. My own grandparents, come from Tiberias in Israel. They were Palestinian Jews, just like there were Palestinian Christians, Palestinian Muslims, and so on. So the history of it is, of course, that the State of Israel was founded, and they accepted a very small territory, and as I mentioned before, the Islamic world could not accept a Jewish state of any kind or any size, and that led to the War of Independence, where they seized a little more territory, and eventually the 1967 war, where they were forced to take even more territory to survive. So this is certainly a long discussion. We could get into the history of it, but I certainly encourage you to check out my film.
Listen, I'm happy for you to plug the film. I've plugged it. I'll plug it again. We like our listeners to get both sides of every argument, Joel. That's why, without sounding like I'm grandstanding or I'm boasting, we're the alternative to the mainstream media. The mainstream media do not want debates like this. Whichever organisation you're watching, whether it's CNN or NBC or Fox, they want to give you one perspective. I'm delighted to have the opposing opinion to my opinion. We didn't mention the Sykes-Picot Agreement, of course, which basically robbed the Ottoman Empire blind. You mentioned the Ottoman Empire. Look, we'll leave that there for now. We could get into that again in the future. I appreciate you discussing it on the programme. What's going to happen, Joel, just finally? Donald Trump has been talking about, you very rightly said earlier on that the guy changes his mind every 3 hours. On the one hand, he said that I wish our leaders had stayed on the beach and taken a holiday instead of invading Iraq in 2003. We'd all be better off. That's a brilliant and a very fair comment. But in some interviews then, quite rightly, as you said, on the same day, so Donald will say, we might have to commit 20,000 troops to go into Syria. What's likely to happen, irrespective of who gets elected, with the situation in Syria? Are we going to have a war? Are we going to have a ground war?
I think there's consensus across all candidates and parties that there is no taste for reinserting American troops into a Middle East ground war. I think it's taken them many years, but things I've been saying since way back is that this is an internal civil war in the Islamic world. Going back to the Sykes-Picot Agreement, the French and British divided up the Ottoman Empire into territories, to European-style territories where they
illegally.
You're a Jordanian, even though there never was such a thing. You're a Syrian. You're this. You're that. But it really was not a group of people like we had language and religious groups in Europe when nationalism, or secular nationalism, was developed in the 1700s. This was a Christian solution to Christian problems. The Protestant Reformation was a movement for hundreds of years to get rid of the Pope, to bring religion out of government, and they came up with a Christian solution, which was secular nationalism. This secular nationalism did not fit into the Islamic world, where loyalty could not be to a nation state. Loyalty could only be to Islam and to God. This was the fundamental problem. When they divided up these territories, it was inevitable that one day they would collapse because the concept of secular nationalism did not fit into their religion or their history. So we're seeing that collapse take place as a civil war, and there's no way that American troops are ever going to affect that, whether they go to Afghanistan, Iraq, or Syria. So I think there's consensus that people have learned that this is not something that's ever going to work out.
I hope you're right, Joel. I hope you're right, my friend. We could have another argument about how ISIS came to be. We know the French former foreign minister, we know former MI5 and MI6 operatives said that they were arming separatists in Syria as far back as 2008, 2009. We've been doing this for years. Clinton said it herself. I've really enjoyed having you on the programme, Joel. Thanks for coming on. I love what it is that you do. I love having different opinions on the show. And I'm certainly not patronising you, by the way. Your films are terrifically well made. They're subjective, but then again, I'm subjective when I give my opinion. But they're certainly worth watching. Folks, go to joelgilbert.net and find out more about him if you haven't seen his films already. And I do hope you'll come back again, Joel, in the future.
Thanks for having me anytime. Thank you so much.
Marvellous. Joel Gilbert on the line to us there from Los Angeles, the city of angels. It is 3 minutes to the top of the hour. Well, needless to say, a lot of tweets, so I'll get through as many of them as I possibly can. Wayne was on to say, Israel, UK, US are whores to the internationalists and the elite. Forget these little factions. They have been created to hide evil. Des asks, Des Britain, why are 10,000 Jews happy to remain in Iran? That is true. In southern Iran, there is a viable Jewish community there. That's very good. Luke says, Richie, this fella's right, though. The USA does use Israel as the first line of defence. However, Zionists run its foreign policy. Zana was on to say, more to the point, he has Zionism blinding him. I am nearly barfing here. Totally lost respect for this guy. Listen, I'm not trying to educate anybody. I'm not trying to change anybody. But we can't lose respect for people because they disagree with us. Let's be different. That's what this particular programme, that's what sets it apart from everything else. I'm happy to hear these guys and not to be abusing them on social media. I want to hear them. He's sincere. He believes in what he's saying, and he's put some very interesting things out there. And he's done some good stuff as well, and made some good films with interesting points of view. Des was on to say, this is making my blood boil. Where are the Jews from? Poland. Aha, he is Jewish, says Des. JP was on to say, I've watched film from 1920s Palestine, very nice and civil place in the 20s. And that's a good point. It doesn't matter what the indigenous people of that part of the world called themselves. It was their home. It's where they lived. And the French and the British started the chain reaction that led to 800,000 natives being booted out, brutally murdered between 1947 and 1949. Millie was on to say, what is this guy on about free speech and all? What a muppet, she says. That's not very polite, Millie. Wow. Himanshi was on to say, that's Himanshi in not far from Delhi. How are you, Himanshi? I love arguing and debating with the opposition, she says. So do I. So do I. And you, Usmale 2015 says, I don't mind the debate, but it's difficult to hear so many lies. Well, again, Usmale, that's your perspective. I profoundly disagree with Joel Gilbert, but I'm not going to call him a liar because I disagree with him or because I think I'm right. But I understand the depth of feeling when we talk about Palestine. I do, of course. D says, it doesn't matter where Palestinians are originally from. They were there first. Leave them alone. Israel should get over it. And there's been millions of tweets, understandably, about that.